So then we are back with the more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. As per YershiYAhu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then YershiYAhu the prophet, we find then sections of this great prophet where then the last few studies we verified the work of Daniel the prophet. Obviously he was aware of the prophecies of YershiYAhu during his time of being a boy, because we understand later on he obviously had a copy of YershiYAhu the prophet, and YershiYAhu obviously was in line with the prophecies of YershiYAhu. So then obviously this prophet had a situation very unique in his life, because as we read then Daniel, the second chapter is extremely important because brings us many aspects of the time of the end. So then, let's then verify what then the reason for this first transitional time, and why then this world has come out of the 1,000 years of deceit, and then the traders of the earth once again are ruling the world. So let's evaluate then what are some characteristics of this situation, so then we can evaluate the existing traders of today. So then Daniel was obviously a very young man, and he obviously came from the nation, and the nation obviously was in exile because the nation did not maintain 100% obedience, and the sabbatical year was never respected during the time that the nation owned the land for 490 years. They never maintained the yearly Shabbat. So then obviously they were 70 years in captivity, and then the nation obviously thought the world had ended, because the site of the holy temple was gone, the Babylonians were taken over, and the temple destroyed. It was a very, very tough situation for the holy nation. So then, what went on so importantly regarding this Daniel? Because the king of Babylon, he was giving into his hand. It was not a situation that he conquered, it was given to him. But let's evaluate, while then the king of Babylon, in the second year of his reign, he was then resting, and a dream came to him. And this dream obviously was related with the Almighty, the Creator, wanting to reveal the prophecies to his people primarily, so then his people through obedience can then direct the rest of the world. And this obviously is the objective of the mighty Creator, because he wants his nation to lead the other nations as per his instructions. Daniel then obviously was there, and Ashpenaz, obviously he was a person very prominent. He was involved with the guards. And then while the king had the dream, the king himself had asked his sorcerers, and they could not reveal what was the dream, neither could they interpret. So then the king was extremely serious, because he wanted his dream revealed, and also an interpretation for what he saw in the spirit. So none of his sorcerers could do what he asked, so he gave the order for Ashpenaz to come around and destroy them. Daniel was not around during this time, because Daniel was a foreigner, and he was taking care of some other situations, he was not invited to give the king the answers, because obviously he was a pagan king. But then Daniel heard that these guards, they were going around and murdering these people. And because the Creator is merciful and understandable as far as this situation, he then decided to use Daniel to save the lives of these scoundrels, because that's what they were. So then, what went on was, he gave himself to Ashpenaz and said, please take me quickly to the presence of the king. So then, this situation, this rush situation of going around and murdering, can be then halted. So Ashpenaz promptly had taken him into his court, and then the king inquired of him, and Daniel not only gave the interpretation, but he told what the dream was. So then, let's evaluate as far as what's so important regarding Daniel that should gives us a few parameters so we can then make sure to have these lines for ourselves. What then the Creator is doing based from the prophecies spoken. Now, if you are one of those persons regarding the Hebrew culture, the Hebrew language, and if you do not want to know the Hebrew culture and the Hebrew language, you won't ever understand the prophecies. Because the Hebrew language, the Hebrew writings were then recorded by the Hebrew prophets. And with the utmost, each person should be very concerned in learning Hebrew, so then they can understand the various types of words used regarding a particular prophecy. In other words, Hebrew is extremely important if you want to become a beacon of light to those who are outside searching for answers as far as the end of this world. Now, if you do not understand then the prophecies of Daniel in Hebrew, if you don't research it, then makes it very dangerous, because there are lots of interpretations out there. However, there is only a interpretation that should be done, and these are obviously through the prophets of the holy nation. So then, Daniel was there, he was brought in the presence of the king, and the king inquired, and he gave the answer. Now he said, O king, then what you saw was a huge statue. So now, why then the statues were very prominent back then? If you study history, archaeology, or biblical archaeology, obviously you have to be a person not only religious, but you have to be a scholar, and then search for yourself what you read. Because more than 90% of the instructions or the Bible, these are facts. It's not religion, it's fact. So then, every time you have facts, you have to build up your library. And this library then must be properly maintained. This statue was very popular because people would pray at the base of these statues. There were a certain number of statues, they had names, and then the people would come around in these cubicles and they would worship. So then, let's understand why Daniel then spoke with the king in such a popular fashion. And Daniel went there and he responded. And then he said that the head of gold obviously was the king of Babylon, and then later on came the Middle Persians, and then later on then came the Alexander the Great, and so on and so forth. Each of them then giving you an understanding from the head of gold, and then silver, and then bronze, and so on and so forth. And then iron, and then iron and clay is where we are at. So then times and the seasons in the holy instructions in the Tanakh, for instance, there is a section of it in the Torah. We must be acquainted with those feasts because they determine the seasons and the times. Now, if you want to hear from the mouth of people that do not study Hebrew, they do not study the holy instructions, they do not study the feasts, how can you have a bearing on your future if you do not study Hebrew. Now, when you study Hebrew, does not mean you are becoming Jewish. Not many people of the world, when they speak English, means they are from England. Well, that's the meaning. The meaning of the English language is from England. The United States speaks the English language. Are they Englanders? No. New Zealand, they speak English mostly. Are they Englanders? No. They are New Zealanders, are they not? So then, when we learn Hebrew, we maintain our identity, yet we are being concerned with learning a very prominent language of the prophecies. So then, reading from this perspective, then, what Daniel was then concerned with? He obviously saw precisely then the statue that the Creator himself had revealed. Daniel did not understand the many situations related with it. So through the life of Daniel, then he began a quest of praying and spending time with the Creator himself. So then the Creator, bit by bit, was then releasing the information, and he was then recording. What is so important as far as there's these second and first transitions? Now let's then, before we understand the base of the statue where we are living at, we are at the very base of the statue where iron does not mix with the clay. Now there are many interpretations as far as then the base of the statue and the stone that later on comes on as the kingdom. However, what is pertinent is then understanding the clay and the iron. Some nations are going to be strong, some nations are going to be weak. And then Daniel wanted to go forward and ask more related to the layer of the Gentiles, because when we understand the prophecies of the Gentiles, they are always layers related with the trade. When there is tabernacling, for instance, then becomes the son of Ibrahim, Yitzhak, second son. So then, based from what then we have thus far, Daniel the 11th chapter, and then YershiYAhu the 23rd chapter, we find sections there that gives us bits of clue what then the Creator has on his agenda for this world. A section of it is there. For instance, there is a portion there stating that the Yod-He Vav-He of hosts has purposed it to stain the pride and the glory and to bring the honored man of this earth into contempt. So what does he mean as far as the man of importance? Bringing down then to contempt. Let's evaluate what Daniel was then purposing in his life of discovering. Now, these kinds of understanding you don't get from every Sunday if you go to church, or every Shabbat if you go to Shabbat. These are very important and profound understandings of the layers related with the prophecies. Now, you can understand prophecies by what they are, but they have multi-layered understandings, and some of them, they were reflected prophecies, and they are yet reflected. So when you read a particular prophecy from the nation, you find then that the situation itself has taken place, but then in 1008, let's try to understand there, because that's where then the cities of the Messiah were no more. Every city was destroyed. The spirit of the Messiah was no longer directing. Yet he was present, but his people could not have a relation with him. In fact, they could not maintain leading the world because the world had rejected. And then it was like this for 1,000 years. That's why you hear the term then the New World Order, because the order that was given from the Mashiach then was rejected. But it was only for a time. 1,000 years has gone by, and in 2008, then the 1,000 years of the seat then had ended, and we are doing the first transition in couple of situations. One of them is religious, the second is obviously trade. So when you read the 23rd chapter of YershiYAhu the prophet, you are lining up with the rest of the prophecies of Daniel and YershiYAhu and Zephaniah and also Enoch, because the times of the end are related with the prophecies of Enoch and what he saw in the spirit. So then, when we read these prophecies, let's understand that the Creator himself is taking the power away from governments and he's given to the freighters. That's what he's doing. Besides this situation, then what's going on with tabernacling? Now, tabernacling is also extremely important, because that's precisely what Daniel 11 states. And not only this, then there is the construction of the third temple. So there are many aspects regarding then Daniel the second chapter. These could have a very wonderful study. For instance, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, having a conference of some sort. These are absolutely spectacular understandings of the holy instructions. However, the Hebrew is a must. You must understand the Hebraic culture, the Hebraic words, the Hebraic teachings, so then we understand in the times and the seasons. If you do not have a very high love for the language of Hebrew, you won't be able to become a light to those who are in the dark. So then, what can we expect as far as then Revelation? Where do we then link Revelation with Daniel? Well, both of them are very much linked. Time-wise, we are speaking of roughly 500 years before the birth of the Mashiach, and at least roughly 120 years after his birth. So we are then roughly 600 years apart from the Apocalypse and Daniel. However, they are very much linked up with it. Now, from the prophecy of Daniel and the prophecy of Yohanan, you have roughly 600 years. Then from our time, we have another roughly couple thousand years, where then the prophecy itself takes place, stating that the Mashiach would have leadership in this world for a time. Then we begin our understanding at the kingdom to come versus the reigning of the Mashiach. Now the understanding is this. Some people, they say post. Some people believe prior of his kingship, prior of his kingdom, prior of the Mashiach being a king. Now the situation is this. There is a portion in Shemuel. You find then the Creator himself had spoken. He was obviously in the facet of Gibor and not Boré. And then while he was talking with Shemuel, Shemuel then was very upset because the nation of his own was then pushing for a king rather than himself as then the prophet. Now we understand Shemuel had a couple of sons and they were scoundrels, and the people were very concerned because they were fighting with the Philistines and they had to have a strong leader to fight against the Philistine encroaching in their country. And they could not trust the sons of Shemuel. So then Shaul, the son of Kish, then came around. The Creator himself had picked him because the nation was obviously searching for a leader, and they searched a leader of their own. Now, they did this on their own. The word states then the Almighty had picked himself. He didn't do this. If you read very precisely from Hebrew, not saying for you to read translations, you have to understand Hebrew. From the Hebraic understanding, you find the Creator did not pick Shaul. This was the desire of the people. Later on, the Creator did pick David. So then you understand the outcome of them both. Now, as far as what's going on in relation with then Revelation, the understanding of nations, the understanding of this time of the end, people then are asking themselves, is this every day is going to remain forever? The answer is no. There is a new trade system coming, and the time is very short. We have maybe a year and a half yet, a bit more time until the system becomes even more evident, until the system is launched. So then, let's evaluate what Daniel has said. We are then obviously at the base of the statue. We are during a very important time of transition. And then later on comes a second transition. So then you have the trade of the world given back to those who are from trade. And the governments then, they are no longer in power. They do have the leverage of making decisions, but the ultimate decision is made by freighters. That's why when you read then the 8th chapter of Revelation, you find in the merchants of the earth. In the merchants of the earth, you don't find anymore local modern governments. You find aspects of Babylon being kingdom because of the spirit of deceit and lies, but you don't find any more modern governments. You find the freighters. Lines up then with YershiYAhu the prophet, the 23rd chapter. So then, these layers are given then a few sections, so then we can become more prominent in explaining these and understanding more Hebrew. As far as we are going, where we are heading towards, it depends upon what then the Soviet Union is going to do, and also China. The nations that are involved in the 11th chapter of Daniel are then the nations of the BRICS. But primarily, there are the first, second, and third nations. Africa is one of them, the Soviet Union, and China. These are the main players of the Daniel, the 11th chapter. Later on, I'm going to explain more the flow of these nations and what they belong and what they're going to do. And then later on, I'm going to understand also tabernacling. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.